No one heard the weak Omega crying beneath the throne room. No one except the wolf that had been asleep inside the king for 7 years. The cellar door slammed above Emily Harper with a sound that seemed too final for something made of wood and iron. Dust fell from the low ceiling in pale little streams, catching in her hair, on her lashes, on the shoulders of the plain gray dress she had scrubbed clean that morning because even servants, her stepmother said, should not embarrass the house when royalty came. The lock turned once, then twice. On the other side, Margaret Harper's voice drifted down cold and careful. "Stay quiet until the feast is over, Emily. One night of silence is the only useful thing you can give this family." A second voice laughed softly. "Vanessa, sweet as honey when nobles were near, sharp as broken glass when they were not. Don't worry, mother. She is good at disappearing." Their footsteps faded up the narrow stairs, leaving Emily with the smell of damp stone, old barrels, and winter air leaking through a cracked foundation wall. Above her, Blackpine Hall glowed with hundreds of candles. She could hear the muffled sweep of music, the proud call of horns, the low thunder of arriving wolves. Every important family in the Northern Territories had gathered tonight to kneel before King Alexander Blackwood, the Alpha King whose name was spoken like a storm warning. Emily pressed her palms against the cellar door and pushed, though she already knew it would not move. She was 21 years old enough to know when a cage had been built long before the door ever closed. They had called her weak since her first failed shift. They had called her defective when her scent never bloomed like other Omegas. They had called her a burden when her hands shook during training and a shame when she lowered her eyes at court gatherings. But the thing they feared most was not her weakness. It was the strange gentleness in her voice, the way crying children calmed when she hummed, the way frightened horses leaned toward her instead of bolting, the way pain seemed to loosen around people when she whispered, "You're safe now." Margaret had seen it that afternoon, when a kitchen boy burned his hand near the ovens and Emily sang without thinking. The redness faded. The child stopped shaking, and Margaret's face had gone white. "Which blood?" she had whispered, not with wonder, but with fear. Now Emily stood beneath the royal hall, hidden like a stain beneath a rug, while Vanessa waited upstairs in silver silk to be admired by a king. Emily tried to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her before fever took her voice forever. "Do not let them make your heart ugly, little moon. Pain passes through you. It does not have to become you." A burst of applause rolled overhead, followed by a silence so deep it pressed through the stones. He had arrived. Even from below, Emily felt the change. The air tightened. The old walls seemed to hold their breath. Somewhere above her, boots crossed the grand floor with slow, measured power, and every wolf in Blackpine Hall bowed to the Northern King. Emily backed into the corner, wrapping her arms around herself as the cold climbed through her thin slippers. She told herself not to cry. Crying never opened doors. Crying never changed minds. Crying only gave cruel people proof that they had found the softest place to press. But then the music began again, bright and elegant, and the sound of it hurt more than the cold. It reminded her that life was continuing above her without even a pause. Laughter rose. Glasses chimed. Vanessa's practiced voice floated faintly through a floor vent, warm and charming, telling someone that poor Emily had always been fragile, always unstable, always better kept away from excitement. Something in Emily's chest folded inward. She sank onto the stone floor, knees drawn close, and pressed one hand over her mouth. She tried to hold the sound inside. She truly did. But loneliness had a weight, and tonight it was heavier than her strength. One small sob slipped free. It was barely louder than a breath. Yet the cellar answered it. The stones trembled beneath her. The candle flames upstairs shivered blue. And in the center of the throne room, King Alexander Blackwood stopped moving as if an invisible hand had closed around his heart. For 7 years, the royal wolf inside him had slept in silence, untouched by noble bloodlines, priestess prayers, or the perfumed omegas brought before him like offerings of gold. But beneath the floor, a broken girl cried in the dark, and something ancient opened its silver eyes. For one heartbeat, every candle in Blackpine Hall leaned toward the floor as if bowing to something no one else could see. King Alexander Blackwood stood at the center of the polished room, surrounded by velvet banners, silver goblets, and nervous smiles, yet his attention was no longer on the feast. It had dropped beneath him, through 12 inches of carved oak, through the stone foundation, into the cold place where Emily Harper had been left with nothing but darkness and her own trembling breath. Across the hall, Vanessa Harper paused in the middle of her graceful approach, one hand lifted as if she had been about to offer the king a glass of wine. She was beautiful in the way her mother had planned her to be beautiful, every curl pinned, every ribbon chosen, every word practiced until it sounded effortless. "Your Majesty," she said softly, trying to reclaim the moment. "Blackpine House is honored beyond measure." Alexander did not look at her. His silver eyes had gone distant, sharpened by a sound that had faded before anyone else could name it. Lord Everett, his chief advisor, stepped closer with quiet concern. "My king." Alexander raised one hand, and the entire room fell still. Above the silence, Margaret Harper's smile tightened. She had spent all day building this perfect scene. The floors had been scrubbed until they shone like frozen water. The hearths had been stacked high with pine logs. The best cuts of roast beef and sugared apples had been placed on long tables beneath garlands of winter roses. Every weak thing had been hidden. Every shameful thing had been locked away. Especially Emily, the forgotten daughter. The girl who had learned early that kindness could be treated like a flaw when it did not come wrapped in power. Emily had not always lived in the cellar shadows. Once, before her father died, she had been a small white-skinned girl with soft brown hair and wide gray eyes, running barefoot through the orchard behind Harper House, laughing when her mother called her Little Moon. Her mother, Caroline, had believed gentleness was a kind of strength. She had taught Emily to speak softly to frightened animals, to listen before judging, to hold out her hand even when the world pulled its own hand away. But after Caroline was gone, and after Emily's first shift failed beneath the full moon, the house changed around her. Servants stopped meeting her eyes. Cousins whispered that no alpha would ever claim an omega who could not answer her own wolf. Margaret moved Emily from the family wing to a narrow servant room near the kitchens, then from the table to the corner, then from the corner to wherever she could be useful without being seen. By 16, Emily knew the weight of laundry baskets better than the weight of a necklace. By 18, she knew how to mend Vanessa's gowns by candlelight while her stepsister slept. By 21, she knew how to swallow pain so smoothly that people mistook her silence for agreement. Yet something in her refused to turn bitter. When the old stable dog limped, she sat with him until he slept. When a kitchen maid cried over a letter from home, Emily warmed tea and hummed until the girl could breathe again. When children mocked her for being weak, she still saved the sweet rolls with the most honey for the smallest ones. That was what Margaret could not understand. Cruelty had pressed Emily down for years, and somehow it had not taught her to be cruel. Beneath the hall now, Emily wiped her face with cold fingers and listened as the celebration above her held its breath. She did not know the king had stopped because of her. She did not know that the sleeping royal wolf had lifted its head inside him. She only knew that, for the first time all night, the world above had gone quiet enough to hear her own heart. The quiet in Blackpine Hall did not last. It broke slowly, first in the rustle of silk, then in the uneasy clearing of throats, then in the soft clink of a spoon against crystal as someone's hand trembled too close to the dessert table. Margaret Harper stepped forward before suspicion could find a shape. "Your Majesty," she said with a practiced laugh, light enough to sound harmless. "The old house makes strange sounds in winter. Pipes, stones, drafts in the walls. We have been meaning to repair the lower rooms." Alexander finally turned his head toward her. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of a door closing. Margaret's smile faltered. Vanessa, sensing the shift, glided closer with the graceful confidence of a woman who had been told all her life that beauty could solve almost anything. "Perhaps your Majesty would prefer music," she offered. "Our northern ballads are said to calm even restless spirits." That word, calm, moved through Alexander like a cold blade of memory. For 7 years, healers had tried to calm him. Priests had surrounded him with silver incense and old prayers. Noble families had sent daughters with perfect posture and polished voices, each one hoping the royal wolf would stir for her bloodline, her scent, her beauty, her ambition. None had reached him. None had reached the ancient creature sleeping beneath his ribs, the one bound by a curse no court scholar could name without lowering his voice. Alexander had come to Blackpine Hall because of a rumor, not because of Vanessa Harper. 3 weeks earlier, a royal scout had reported a strange healing in the western village, a child burned by an oven, a wound eased by a girl's song before the physician could arrive. The witness had called it impossible. The court had called it dangerous. Alexander had called it hope, though only in the silence of his own mind. Now he stood beneath banners embroidered with the Harper crest and felt that hope pulse under the floorboards like a hidden star. Below, Emily pushed herself upright, one hand braced against a wine barrel. The cellar was not large, maybe 12 feet across, with shelves of dusty jars and old winter stores lining the walls. A single narrow window near the ceiling showed a strip of black sky and the pale edge of snow beginning to fall. She could have called out. She could have pounded on the door. But the habits of a lifetime were stronger than panic. Do not make trouble. Do not shame the family. Do not give them another reason. Her throat ached with the sob she had tried to bury. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the kitchen boy's frightened eyes from that afternoon, the way his small hand had shaken until she sang the lullaby her mother used to sing by the hearth. Just a few notes. Just enough to tell him the pain did not own him. The skin had cooled under her palm. The boy's breathing had slowed. And for one brief moment, Emily had felt something answer inside herself. Not a wolf, not exactly, but a silver warmth unfolding behind her heart. Then Margaret had appeared in the doorway. The fear in her stepmother's face had been worse than anger. Fear made people careful. Fear made them cruel with clean hands. "You will not sing tonight," Margaret had whispered. "You will not speak where he can't hear you." Emily had not understood then. She began to understand now, though only barely, as another wave of silence rolled overhead and seemed to settle directly above her. In the hall, Alexander took one step away from Vanessa. Lord Everett lowered his voice. "Sire, the treaty presentation is prepared." Alexander's gaze stayed on the floor. "There is someone beneath us." Margaret's face drained of color so quickly that even Vanessa noticed. "Storage rooms, Your Majesty." Nothing more. Alexander looked at her then, and the silver in his eyes brightened like moonlight striking ice. "Then you will not mind opening them." For the first time that evening, Margaret Harper did not move quickly enough to hide what she was thinking. Her eyes flicked toward the west corridor, then toward the steward standing near the wall, then back to the Alpha King with the desperate calculation of someone watching a secret loosen under pressure. "Of course, Your Majesty," she said, but her voice had lost its velvet edge. "Only, the lower rooms are old and unpleasant. I would hate for the royal court to be troubled by dust and storage clutter during such an honored visit." Alexander studied her without blinking. He was not loud. He did not need to be. Power gathered around him in the stillness, cold and immense, until even the flames in the hearth seemed to burn more carefully. "I asked for a door to be opened," he said. "Not for a performance." A murmur passed through the room. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Lord Everett took one step back, making space not because he feared his king, but because he knew the ancient signs. The royal wolf was no longer sleeping. It moved beneath Alexander's skin like winter waking under the earth, silent, watchful, and impossible to command. For 7 years, the royal court had lived around the absence of that wolf. They had whispered about the curse after midnight, when the northern winds hit the palace windows and the king stood alone on the balcony, staring toward mountains covered in white. They said his wolf had retreated after the Battle of Frostmere, when an old enemy left a shadow on the royal bloodline. They said no mate bond could form while the royal wolf slept. They said the northern kingdom would one day break because its king could not be fully whole. Alexander had never corrected them. A king learned early that people feared mystery more than truth. But he knew the truth. He felt the emptiness every morning when he woke before dawn. 5,000 miles of territory, depending on a man whose strongest half had gone silent. He felt it at every council meeting, every treaty ceremony, every moon festival where hopeful families paraded daughters before him and waited for a miracle his body refused to give. Then a single broken sound had risen from beneath the floor, and the part of him thought lost forever had opened its eyes. Below, Emily heard movement above her, sharper now, no longer the gentle rhythm of dancing and serving. Chairs slid. Boots shifted. Someone spoke in a tone too low for her to catch. Her pulse fluttered. She stood beneath the cellar door and lifted one hand, then let it fall. If Margaret found out she had made a sound, there would be consequences. Not the kind that left marks for others to see, because Margaret was too careful for that, but colder punishments. Meals forgotten. Work doubled. Doors closed. Names erased from invitations before they were ever written. Emily knew those punishments well. She stepped away from the door and into the deepest corner of the cellar, where the shelves cast long bars of shadow across the floor. The narrow window showed snow collecting along the sill, each flake delicate and white against the dark. She tried to make herself small. She tried to become the quiet thing they always wanted. But then footsteps descended the first stair. Slow, heavy, certain. Not Margaret's clipped pace. Not Vanessa's soft glide. These steps carried a weight that seemed to move through the stone itself. Emily's breath caught. Above the stairs, Margaret spoke quickly. "Your Majesty, please. There is no need for you to trouble yourself personally. I will have a servant bring the key." "No," Alexander replied. One word, calm as falling snow. The footsteps continued. Emily backed farther into the corner, heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Light spilled through the cracks around the door as torches gathered outside. Voices crowded the stairwell. Someone whispered her name like it was a scandal taking human form. Then Vanessa's voice cut through, bright with false concern. "Emily? Oh, poor thing. Did you wander down there again? She has always been confused when frightened, Your Majesty. We try to protect her dignity." Emily closed her eyes. The lie was so smooth, so familiar, that for one terrible second, she almost felt ashamed for standing on the other side of it. Then Alexander spoke, closer now, separated from her only by wood and iron. "Emily Harper," he said, and her name in his voice did not sound like a burden. It sounded like something found. "Step away from the door." The command in Alexander's voice reached Emily before she could decide whether to trust it. Step away from the door. Not hide. Not explain. Not apologize. Just move where she would be safe. Her feet obeyed before her fear could argue, carrying her 2 steps back across the cold stone floor. On the other side, the lock gave a hard metallic rattle as Margaret finally produced the key with shaking fingers. "Your Majesty, truly, this is unnecessary," she said, her words rushing now. "Emily is delicate. She becomes overwhelmed. We only wish to spare her embarrassment." The key slipped once before it found the hole. Emily heard Vanessa give a soft, wounded sigh for the listening court. "My sister has always misunderstood our care. We love her, of course, but she has episodes. She imagines things. She cries for attention when she feels forgotten." That lie struck deeper than the cellar cold. Emily lowered her eyes, because part of her had been trained to shrink whenever Vanessa sounded gentle in public. A cruel word was easier to resist than a kind voice used as a mask. The door opened with a long groan, and torchlight poured into the cellar like sunrise entering a grave. Emily raised one hand against the brightness. Shapes filled the stairway behind the king. Margaret pale with panic, Vanessa shining in silver silk, Lord Everett grave and silent, half the northern court leaning forward with hungry curiosity. And in front of them stood Alexander Blackwood. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered beneath a black formal coat lined with dark fur, his presence filling the cramped doorway, as if the cellar had been built too small for the truth he carried. His face was carved in cold, beautiful lines, but his eyes were what stopped her breath. Silver. Not gray. Not blue. Silver like moonlight on a frozen lake. He looked at her, and the room behind him seemed to disappear. Emily realized all at once how she must appear. Hair loosened from its pins, dress dusty at the hem, cheeks damp, hands red from cold, one sleeve torn where it had caught on a storage hook. Shame rose fast and hot. She folded her arms across herself, not from a modesty, but from the old instinct to hide every sign that she had been hurt. Alexander saw the movement. Something shifted in his expression, so slight no one else might have noticed. Not anger, not pity. Recognition. "Who put you here?" he asked. Emily's mouth opened, but years of silence stood between her and the answer. Margaret stepped in quickly. "She came down herself, Your Majesty." The girl has always had a habit of seeking dark corners when attention frightens her. Vanessa moved beside her mother, eyes bright with pretend concern. "Emily, tell him. Tell His Majesty you were never locked in. Tell him we would never shame our own blood. Every gaze landed on Emily. The pressure of them made the cellar tilt. She wanted to speak. She wanted one honest sentence to leave her body whole. But fear tightened her throat until no words came. Margaret's smile sharpened almost invisibly. She knew this version of Emily. The quiet one. The obedient one. The one who survived by becoming small. Then Alexander stepped down into the cellar. The court fell silent above him. He removed his cloak, heavy black wool warmed by his shoulders, and placed it gently around Emily without touching more than the fabric. The scent of pine, snow, and clean night air surrounded her. You do not have to defend the truth from people who buried it, he said softly. Emily looked up. The words were not loud, but they opened something inside her more surely than any key. Behind Alexander, the torches flickered blue again. A low tremor moved through the stones, not frightening, not wild, but alive. Lord Everett drew in a careful breath. "Sire," he whispered from the stairs. "Your wolf." Alexander did not turn away from Emily. His silver eyes brightened until the cellar walls seemed touched by moonlight. "I know," he said, and for the first time in 7 years, from somewhere deep within the Alpha King, the royal wolf answered. The answer came as a vibration beneath Emily's feet, deep enough to make the dust slide from the shelves and gentle enough that none of the jars cracked. It was not a growl, not a roar, not the frightening sound her pack used in stories about kings and monsters. It was a pulse, low and ancient, like the first note of a song the earth had been waiting to remember. Emily stood wrapped in Alexander's cloak, staring at him while the cold around her seemed to loosen its grip. The silver in his eyes did not frighten her. It should have. Every lesson of her life had taught her to fear dominant wolves, to lower her gaze, to make her voice smaller, to become harmless before someone powerful decided she was inconvenient. But Alexander looked at her as if her softness had not made her less, as if it had called something sacred back from the dark. On the stairs, Margaret recovered just enough to speak. "Your Majesty, I beg you not to be deceived. Whatever you are feeling, it is not natural. That girl has always had a strange effect on weaker minds." Vanessa gasped delicately, as though the thought pained her. "Mother, please. Emily cannot help what she is." Emily flinched. Alexander saw it. The royal wolf saw it, too. The torch flames stretched taller, burning blue at their centers, and every wolf in the stairwell lowered their heads without being told. Lord Everett's face had gone pale with awe. "The court record said this was impossible," he whispered. "The royal wolf responds only to a true sovereign bond." Margaret's gaze snapped toward him. "There is no bond. She is an unclaimed omega with no scent, no wolf, and no standing." The words were old chains, familiar and heavy. Emily had worn them so long that part of her almost accepted their weight. No scent, no wolf, no standing. She looked down at her hands, half hidden beneath the king's cloak, and wondered if the warmth gathering in her palms was real or only shock. It glowed faintly, a soft silver-gold light slipping between her fingers like moonlight through water. Vanessa saw it first. Her perfect face changed. Not much, but enough. Fear crossed her eyes before she could cover it with concern. "See," she said quickly, pointing without stepping closer. "That is what we were trying to protect everyone from." Emily closed her hands into fists, trying to hide the light. "I did not mean to," she whispered. It was the first full sentence she had spoken since the door opened. The sound moved through the cellar and into Alexander like a key turning in a lock. His breath caught once, almost silently. Inside him, the royal wolf pressed forward, not with hunger, not with rage, but with recognition so fierce it felt like grief. For 7 years, Alexander had been surrounded by people trying to fix what was broken in him. None had asked what had hurt him. This trembling omega, hidden beneath his feet, had cried once, spoken once, and his soul had answered. "Do not hide your hands," he said. Emily looked up, uncertain. They said it was wrong. They were wrong. The answer was quiet, absolute. He held out his own hand, palm open, leaving the choice entirely to her. No command, no demand, just space. Emily stared at that hand, the hand of a king, large and steady, offered to someone who had been treated like a secret. Slowly, she placed her glowing fingers against his palm. The moment they touched, the blue flames above them turned silver, and across Blackpine Hall every wolf felt the same impossible truth pass through the stones. The weakest Omega in the house had awakened the oldest power in the north. The touch did not pull Emily out of herself. It brought her back. For one clear breath, she felt the warmth in her palms travel into Alexander's hand, then return to her with something steadier woven through it, like two separate notes finding harmony without losing their own sound. The cellar walls brightened with silver light, soft enough to leave every shadow visible, strong enough to prove they no longer owned her. Above the stairs, the court stood frozen. Wolves who had entered Blackpine Hall to judge silk gowns, bloodlines, and political advantage now stared down at the girl they had never been meant to see. Emily wanted to let go. The weight of so many eyes pressed against her shoulders, and the old instinct rose again, asking her to make herself smaller before someone punished her for taking up space. Alexander's fingers did not tighten around hers. He simply held steady, letting her choose whether to stay. That choice, gentle and unfamiliar, nearly broke her. "Can you walk?" he asked. Emily nodded, though her knees felt uncertain beneath her. "Yes, Your Majesty." Something passed through his face at the title, not displeasure exactly, but distance. "Alexander," he said, low enough that only she and those nearest the door heard. "Tonight, you may call me Alexander." Vanessa made a small sound, half shock, half protest. Margaret reached for her daughter's arm as if to keep her from speaking too soon, but fear had made Vanessa careless. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean to bring her into the hall like this. She is distressed. She is confused. She will embarrass herself, and you." Alexander looked up the stairway. The silver in his eyes was calm now, which made it far more dangerous than anger. "The only embarrassment in this house is the cruelty dressed as concern." No one answered. Emily lowered her gaze, but not quickly enough to miss Margaret's face harden. The woman who had ruled Harper House with soft commands and locked doors was beginning to understand that the story she had written for Emily was being read aloud before witnesses, and the ending no longer belonged to her. Alexander turned back to Emily. "Come into the light," he said. The words were simple, but they landed somewhere deep, where her mother's voice still lived. Emily took one step, then another. Alexander stayed beside her, not dragging, not displaying, only walking at the pace her trembling legs could manage. The cloak trailed behind her over the dusty stones. As they climbed the cellar stairs, the court parted without being told. The same nobles who would not have noticed her carrying trays an hour earlier lowered their eyes as she passed. Lord Everett bowed first, not to the king, but to Emily. It was a slight bow, formal and controlled, yet it sent a ripple through the stairwell. Others followed, uncertain at first, then visibly shaken as the royal wolf's presence filled the narrow passage like winter moonlight. Emily did not understand the protocol, but she understood the feeling. For once, people were making room for her. At the top of the stairs, Blackpine Hall stretched before her in gold and white and stunned silence. The long tables glittered. The musicians had stopped with their hands still hovering over strings. Every candle flame burned silver. Emily saw the exact place where Vanessa had stood waiting to become queen of a story that had never belonged to her. She saw Margaret's careful decorations, the polished floor, the winter roses, the lie of perfection laid over a house that had hidden its gentlest daughter underground. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she swayed. Alexander's hand hovered near her elbow without touching. "Breathe," he said. Emily drew in air. Pine, snow, candle wax, and beneath it all, something bright and wild that seemed to recognize her before she recognized herself. Then the royal wolf answered again, not beneath the floor this time, but through the entire hall. Every wolf present felt it. Every noble turned pale. And Emily Harper, wrapped in the Alpha King's cloak, realized the sound was not calling her weak. It was calling her home. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with everything no one wanted to admit. Emily stood near the entrance of the cellar stairs, wrapped in the Alpha King's cloak, while the nobles of Blackpine Hall stared as if the foundation of their world had shifted under their polished shoes. Only minutes ago, she had been a hidden problem, a weak Omega tucked beneath the floor so her family could present a prettier truth. Now every silver candle flame leaned toward her, and the oldest wolf in the north had answered her voice before the entire court. Margaret Harper was the first to recover. She stepped into the open with both hands clasped at her waist, her face pale but composed. the way it always became when she meant to make a lie look responsible. "Your Majesty, this has gone far enough," she said. "Emily is not well. We have cared for her for years, despite her difficulties, despite her strange episodes. Whatever happened below was frightening, yes, but it should not be mistaken for destiny." A few guests shifted, eager for a safer explanation. People liked cruelty better when it wore the language of care. Vanessa moved beside her mother, tears brightening her eyes with perfect timing. "I only wanted my sister protected," she whispered. "She has always envied things she could not have. Attention overwhelms her. Please, Emily, do not let this become worse." Emily felt the room waiting for her to collapse back into the role they knew. Poor Emily. Confused Emily. Quiet Emily. She looked at Vanessa's silver gown, at Margaret's steady hands, at the long table where no place had ever been set for her. Her throat tightened. She could feel the old fear asking her to apologize just to make the staring stop. Then Alexander stepped forward, not in front of her this time, but beside her. The difference was small. The meaning was not. "You will not speak over her again," he said. His voice did not rise, yet the hall seemed to bow around it. Margaret's mouth closed. Alexander turned to Lord Everett, the royal scout who reported the healing in the western village. "Bring him forward." A man near the back of the hall startled, then stepped through the crowd with a formal bow. He was young, wind-burned from travel, still wearing the dark blue cloak of the Northern Guard. "Your Majesty, tell the court what you saw." The scout glanced once at Emily, and his expression softened with recognition. "A kitchen boy burned his hand near the ovens this afternoon. The physician had not reached him yet." Miss Harper knelt beside him and sang. The child stopped shaking. The mark on his hand faded before my eyes. A wave of whispers broke across the room. Emily looked down, startled by the simple power of being believed. Vanessa's face tightened. Margaret inhaled sharply. "A servant's exaggeration," she said. "Fear can make people imagine miracles." Lord Everett opened the leather folio tucked beneath his arm. "There is another matter, Lady Harper." His tone was careful, but his eyes were bright with the awe of a scholar standing at the edge of a legend. The old Northern records speak of the moon voice, a gift carried by a rare Omega bloodline. It does not command. It does not conquer. It heals, reveals, and calls sleeping wolves back to themselves. Emily's hands warmed beneath the cloak. The silver-gold light returned, faint but undeniable. Every wolf in the hall felt it like a soft hand passing over an old wound. Shoulders eased. Breath steadied. Even the horses outside stopped shifting in their traces. Alexander looked at her then, and the coldness people feared in him seemed to crack, not into weakness, but into something more human. "For 7 years," he said, "my wolf did not answer crown, counsel, blood, or prayer." His gaze swept the hall, then returned to Emily. It answered her pain because her soul was telling the truth. Emily could barely breathe. No one had ever made her pain sound like evidence instead of inconvenience. Margaret whispered, "She is still only an Omega." Alexander's silver eyes hardened. "No," he said. "She is the Omega you tried to bury beneath your ambition." The royal wolf pulsed through the hall again, and this time every candle burned brighter. Emily lifted her chin, not because she was no longer afraid, but because fear was no longer the only thing holding her upright. For the first time, the room did not see a weak girl who had wandered into power by mistake. It saw a white-skinned Omega in a king's cloak, trembling but unbroken, with moonlight shining through her hands. The truth settled over Blackpine Hall like fresh snow, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Emily stood beneath the silver candlelight with Alexander beside her, and for the first time in her life, no one could make her disappear by speaking louder. Margaret's confidence had thinned into silence. Vanessa's tears had lost their shine. Around them, nobles who had arrived expecting a courtship spectacle now watched something older than politics unfold in the center of the room. Lord Everett turned a page in the royal folio with careful hands. "There is one final passage, Your Majesty," he said, his voice hushed. "When the royal wolf wakes to the moon voice, the bond must be witnessed before the Northern Court, not as possession, but as recognition. The chosen Omega stands equal beneath the moon, or the wolf returns to sleep." Equal. The word moved through Emily like warmth through frost. She had been called many things in that house, but never equal. Alexander looked at her, not at the court, not at the records, not at the family that had hidden her away. Emily Harper, he said, each syllable steady enough to hold her fear without crushing it. I will not claim what you do not freely give. I will not turn your pain into another cage. But before every wolf here, I recognize you as the one my royal wolf answered, the one this court will honor, and the one I will protect as long as you allow me to stand beside you. No command followed. No pressure. Only the open space of a choice she had never been trusted to make. Emily looked at the man everyone called cold, and beneath the winter power, she saw restraint. She saw a king holding back an entire room so one trembling Omega could hear her own heart. Her mother's old words rose inside her, soft as a hand on her cheek. Pain passes through you. It does not have to become you. Emily turned toward Margaret and Vanessa. She expected bitterness to come. It would have been easy. It might even have felt fair. But what rose instead was something cleaner, stronger, and far less breakable. You locked me away because you were afraid of what I might be, she said, her voice quiet but carrying through the hall. I believed you for a long time. I thought being gentle meant being weak. The light in her hands brightened. I was wrong. The royal wolf answered with a pulse that made every silver flame bend toward her. One by one, the wolves of Blackpine Hall lowered their heads. Not because she forced them, because something in them knew the difference between power that demanded obedience and grace that made truth visible. Alexander bowed last, not deeply enough to abandon his crown, but enough to show the court that honor could kneel without becoming less. Emily's breath caught. A mark appeared on the inside of her wrist, silver and gold, shaped like a crescent moon surrounding a northern star. Lord Everett went completely still. That symbol vanished from the royal line 300 years ago, he whispered. It belonged to the first Luna of the North. A soft gasp moved through the hall. Alexander took Emily's hand with the same careful permission as before, turning her wrist just enough for the moonlight to touch the mark. His expression changed, not with triumph, but with wonder. Then the curse was never waiting for a stronger wolf, he said. It was waiting for a kinder voice. Outside, the storm clouds parted over Blackpine Hall. Moonlight poured through the high windows, washing the polished floor, the winter roses, the open cellar door, and the girl who had walked out of darkness without letting darkness become her. Emily looked at Alexander and felt the royal wolf settle, not as a threat inside him, but as a guardian finally home. The court would speak of that night for generations, how a hidden Omega's cry awakened a sleeping kingdom, how the coldest king in the north found warmth beneath his own throne room, and how the weakest girl in Harper House became the one no shadow could bury again.